first of all, I would love to say big thanks to Bianca for giving us this time for joining us, for accepting the invitation to do our next live talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share what I can and support new mamas on their Montessori journeys.
Perfect. Bianca, I will say a few words about you and maybe then you can say something as well. You are a Montessori infant guide and consultant. I think everyone knows you from hosting the Montessori Babies podcast, but you also have a Montessori Babies course. You have 15 years of experience both at home and school settings. You have your AMI training 0 to 3. You have a bachelor's in child development and master's in Montessori education. You are a Montessori mom yourself, so you have the teacher experience and the mom experience as well. What did I forget? What should I add? Or do you want to add something?
You covered the all the big points for sure. I spent the majority of my field experience as a Montessori Nido teacher. So I've worked with hundreds of babies and their families, and I started venturing into the home settings. I actually started that because one of my students had to withdraw for health reasons, and I'd worked super hard with her family on implementing Montessori just in a day flow kind of way. But when they had to withdraw, I offered to go in home with them. And they weren't necessarily Montessori aligned or anything like that initially, but what I saw after and what they were able to feel just by incorporating some of the principles in their home, it was just a beautiful transition. So that's how I got into supporting parents in the home. I started the blog and then the podcast. Now I'm teaching the course, and it's been a really fun venture.
Wow, that's nice. That's
Yeah.
nice. Bianca, you have a presentation that you wanted to share.
Yes.
So just so everyone knows more or less the time that we will spend together, we will have around 30 minutes of the presentation that Bianca prepared, and then we will have another 30 minutes of Q&A, and we will either take questions here from Zoom, so you have some advantage of being here live with us. And if there are no questions here on Zoom in the chat, we will also take questions from the registration forms when you were registering for this live talk. And so we will keep it under 60 minutes. Perfect. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. First, thank you everyone for being here. I'm so excited to connect with you all. Let me figure out how to share my screen. All right. We are going to be talking about, as you guys know, supporting baby development through Montessori during their wake windows. This is obviously a topic that is near and dear to my heart. All of my experience and education is in this, and I am a fellow mama. I'm currently doing this as well. My son is now 2.5, but this is him when he was a baby. Within the context of supporting your baby's development through Montessori, we're going to be going over some main points that I hope you can keep as tools in your pocket to think about while your child is awake and while they're sleeping, so you can prep a little bit. So, we're going to be going over how babies learn, so addressing the developmental side of it, how to prepare yourself as a new Montessori parent, and that overarching Montessori principal topic is called the prepared adult, but we're going to be supporting new parenthood in that way, supporting language development, supporting development of concentration, arranging your home to support you and baby, and also laying foundations of independence and inclusion. So we went over who I am. I had this in here, but like I said, have loved supporting new parents in their journeys. I've seen so many new parents find their confidence and their flow when they start to infuse a lot of these principles in their home. And so my hope is that you can take these tools and find the same. So some of the things that I've seen when using some of the tips that we're going to be talking about today, they can help you find small, simple joys in your day, help let go of anxieties and expectations and slow, like we just spoke about, bring confidence and empowerment to your parenting, and then of course set your baby up as an empowered, self-driven, lifelong learner. So there's really benefits to you and baby, and then everyone who's experiencing your environment at home. And you'll see why in just a bit. So, like I said, my goal is that you leave feeling confident in using the tools that we talk about. So those of you who know me, I from my podcast, I love quotes. I love finding inspiration from quotes. So you will see them sprinkled throughout the presentation. So Dr. Montessori said, "It follows that at the beginning of his life, the individual can accomplish wonders without effort and quite unconsciously." And it perfectly segues into our first point, which is how babies learn. So, diving into what is going on in their brain. So, our babies are seeing the most rapid rate of development that they will see in their lifetime. They are forming up to 1 million synapses per second. And then these connections are the building blocks of learning, and every interaction strengthens these neural pathways. So basically, they're on a constant learning mission and they're taking in everything around them. And Dr. Montessori described this absorption as the absorbent mind, as I'm sure you guys have heard. That is one of her most famous works. And it really talks about just the miracle that is the infant and young child brain during these early years, and that they really are just absorbing it. It is forming who they are, right? So, babies and toddlers, what you will also see is that they have a natural drive to learn about their world. They're driven to not only explore their space, but they observe us and absorb what they see us do. So, this natural drive is something that I'm sure you guys have either consciously noticed or unconsciously noticed. It is when you, for example, hold a rattle in front of your young baby's face and you see them super stimulated and they'll try to reach for it, or a crawling baby who crawls over to the cabinets and shakes them up. All of this is that natural drive to learn about their world. So I like to put it in the context of they're little scientists figuring out their environment, exploring, and just building their brain within this. So, as you can imagine, sensory rich environments help the brain form these neural connections. And that combined with movement and exploration is just going to really support the early learning process. One phrase that I like to keep at the forefront of my brain, especially when my son was super tiny, is that they're learning about who they are to the world and who the world is to them. And that initially starts with just you. All they really need is you at the beginning, their relationship to you, that then translates into their exploration in the environment and later on with relations in society and stuff like that. So, with what we just spoke about, just keeping in mind that literally every moment, big or small, however tiny you may think it is, shaping the mind of this sweet child. So they're consistently learning. And you will also soon find out that even though this may sound a little bit daunting, having just a few of these tools in your pocket is really going to help you enhance these earliest moments. So, one of my favorite activities to shift our perspective is what we're going to be doing right now. So, I would love if you guys would drop in the chat the first adjective that pops into your head when you think of your baby or a baby, if you're a guide or a caregiver. Curious. So good. Second curious, curious smiles. Yes. So, all of these energetic. Exactly. Most people start to think happy and interested, adorable, cute, squishy, giggly, delicious, and the new baby smell, soft, funny, maybe loud, demanding. I know when I initially practiced this activity on my husband, he said stinky and silly. All of these are really wonderful adjectives and ring true, right? That describe our babies. But in the context of being a new Montessori parent, some of the things that I want you to keep at the forefront of your mind are adjectives like capable, respectable, powerful, driven, limitless, observer, constant learner, and hard worker. And because they are on this constant mission of learning about who they are to the world and who the world is to them, having these at the forefront of our brain really help us reframe certain situations and see the learning opportunities and lead with respect and capability, which is very important when you're implementing Montessori with your baby. So, the second point that I want to talk about is preparing yourself for these moments. So, Dr. Montessori said children must grow not only in the body, but in the spirit. And the mother longs to follow the mysterious spiritual journey of the beloved one, who tomorrow will be the intelligent divine creation, man. I just thought this was the most perfect way to jump into the prepared adult and being a prepared parent because the Montessori approach is truly for both you and baby. When I think of the transformative experience that it can be, I initially think of when I took my Montessori training. Even before I took my training, I worked in a Montessori school, and everyone who had completed their training came out the other side feeling like they were transformed. And I was just, what does that even mean? But truly, when you start to implement the principles and lead with some of the adjectives that we just spoke about and stuff like that, you will really find that you're approaching your baby in a truly just transformed way. And then I also just want to note that being a prepared adult, being a prepared parent, mama, it can greatly influence how your baby experiences their world, right? Because initially, really, they just need you. And so, you having these tools in your pocket is going to just make the experiences glide, right? And then, of course, it can also enhance your own experiences as a parent because, like I had mentioned earlier, finding confidence and flow and all of these things can be really helpful in early experiences. So, what this means in being a prepared adult, so it means approaching their development with purpose, intention, and support, and understanding that from our language and interactions to the toys and materials we offer, to how we structure their environment, to even how we move within the space. All of that is being absorbed by our babies, right? And like I said, it may sound a little bit daunting, but again, just having all of this information, keeping it at the forefront of your brain and doing your very best is just wonderful, right? That's what's best for your babies. A big pro tip as far as being a prepared adult is to consciously slow down. I want to note that I know early parenthood, early motherhood, you're sleepy, you're juggling a lot, probably maybe balancing other children, housework. There's a lot of things that happen. But being conscious about being slow in certain moments is going to be really beneficial to both you and baby, right? So for baby, because we're consciously slowing down, you'll find moments of concentration and interaction pop up. And then for you too, it's also good for us and our nervous system to consciously slow down as well. So it benefits for everyone. And then another point for the prepared adult, another pro tip is to find small moments for self care. I also know in the beginning, these are really hard to find. And meeting even your own basic needs might feel hard sometimes. Small things. Like I remember when my son was very little, I had to consciously tell myself to get outside and walk because the fresh air was good for the both of us. Or there were moments where listening to certain songs were helpful, stuff like that. Having little tools in your pocket that put even a little bit of juice in your cup will be really helpful in moments where you're needed to slow down and connect and stuff like that. And then also, if you're able to almost in a meditative kind of way, think of a happy place when baby is upset or something like that, that can help you feel regulated, which will then help regulate baby too. And then I just also wanted to know that there's countless research about responsive caregiving and how it supports the earliest years of development. So the third point is supporting language. So during our baby's wake windows, one free and very wonderful gift that we can give them is language. So Dr. Montessori said, to talk is in the nature of man. The child does not learn because he is taught, but because he has the power to learn. As you can see, there are so many benefits to supporting the development of language. Language quite literally is a building block of their brain, and our babies are in their sensitive period for language. So Dr. Montessori described this very specific period where our babies can take in language effortlessly from 0 to 6. And then also in relation to what we just learned about with our baby's brain development, giving them as much language as possible is just so wonderful during this time. So it also supports vocabulary growth. So even when our babies aren't talking yet, they're taking it all in. right? So we're giving them these words, they're building new brain connections. And then when they do start to talk later on, you'll see so many of these words pop out, right? They learn social interactions, it supports their executive function development, cognitive flexibility, symbolic thinking, right? Because you're pairing words to objects, which is early mathematical mind as well. So many benefits to offering language to your kids. And then I do also just want to note that every child develops at their own rate. There are, of course, there are general milestones and such, but there are physical and there are developmental reasons why kids develop at different rates. And so just doing your very best with the tools that we have today, working close with your pediatrician, and just knowing that your child is on their own very beautiful path. What are some ways we can support language during wake windows? So, one thing that I highly recommend is sportscasting. Sportscasting is essentially where you're narrating everything that you're doing. And this is something that is easier to do during the whole infancy, toddlerhood period. But when your baby's a newborn, that's something that you can just think about and just start practicing. It might feel a little bit silly at first. I know for me, when I first got into working with babies, it felt a little bit silly, but after a few days, it'll just become like what you do. And the language is incredible for them. And they're constantly just taking it all in and then relating what's happening to experiences and things like we just mentioned. Serve and return moments of conversation are so, so good for their development. The back and forth that happens with serve and return, there's actually recent studies that came out that support that these are even better than just standard talking to baby because there's so much happening in the back and forth interaction, right? They're learning the social piece to it. You're usually there, connected, slowed down, and present. So there's a lot that can be supported with these serve and return moments. I highly recommend taking even just a minute or two whenever you think about it and offering this moment for your baby. Of course, read every day. This is so good for them. Reading anything and everything too. I know when my son was little, I like to read poems and things that also I would also read, of course, children's books. There's so many beautiful ones out there, but you can read what you want. Singing and rhyming. Singing you can also do throughout the day, not just necessarily. You can do a more formal circle time songs, which I also recommend, but you can sing as you're taking your child to change their diaper, like when you're picking up your baby. And this is something that I did a lot with my son and did a lot in the classroom where I'd say, "You're going to change your diaper," just stuff like that. Be silly, that the positive energy and the music is all just really good for their language development. Directed choices are also amazing. So when your baby can consciously reach, offering them choices between things will help label certain things and get them involved in that way. And then music and movement. So that's music, dancing, rhythm, all of that is amazing for their language development. So, supporting the development of concentration during their wake windows. Interestingly enough, a lot of these different points will support their development of concentration, and I'll tell you why in just a bit. So, Dr. Montessori said the child who concentrates is immensely happy. And that is a picture of my son with our open close material when he was a baby. So, focusing on the development of concentration happens within environment setup, which we're going to be talking about next. For example, having a big cluttered space with a lot of things around. If you think about how baby's brain is working, if they're taking everything in, it can be really hard to focus on this one toy that you put in front of them when there's a lot of other things around. So having a tidier, kind of simple environment will help them in that way. And then also the toys that we offer too, right? So if you think of a big light up toy that has a lot of different activities on it versus a toy or material that maybe isolates their skill, or what I like to say is where they're using their brain as the battery, these will encourage elongated moments of concentration. The way you move and interact is so big. That's what I talked about in the prepared adult side of it. Moving slowly, being conscious that they're always watching you. And then, like I said, the way that you interact too, having those back and forth moments. waiting for them to lose interest. So waiting for their moment of concentration to be done segues into the last point, which is do not whenever you can, as often as possible, because I know in the home again, you're juggling so much, but try not to interrupt a focused moment as often as possible because those moments are just so essential for their development of concentration. So you might notice that at 6 months, when they start to sit and they're using a material that you offered them, they are using it for 30 seconds. But then you watch them as they grow. And if you don't necessarily interrupt these moments and you keep watching, what they're interested in, these moments will start to elongate. And that's the idea on development of concentration. So we can support it with all these different points during wake windows. So, supporting the development of concentration, as I'm sure you've guessed, really helps later on as well. And it is both an innate quality and something that is developed. So, when we focus really hard on all we can do is prepare their environment, which includes us and their physical space, and do our very best. And this will just enhance their experiences later on. And like I just mentioned, so much of the development of concentration just comes from all of these different points that we're going over today working together. So, arranging your home Montessori style. So, this is something that can be done, I guess one time, not necessarily during their wake windows, but you can use it during your wake windows, right? So, when you prepare it in the way that we're going to talk about, then their wake windows can be used exploring and just enhancing their early days. So, Dr. Montessori said the environment must be rich in motives which lend interest to activity and invite the child to conduct his own experiences. So, the prepared environment is essential to the Montessori experience and allows the child to freely and safely explore. The prepared environment, in my experience, is one of those pillar principles that is essential for the Montessori experience to evolve and for you to experience a lot of the positive outcomes that when I work with parents that they're hoping for. And it can look different in everybody's home, right? Because there's different sizes of homes, there's different styles of homes, and really just incorporating some of the principles that we're going to talk about can make the world of difference for your child's early learning experience. So you can absolutely honor your own unique style. And what I love about the prepared environment is that it can bring a huge sense of peace because there's a simplicity to it. It's a less is more type approach, but it is incredibly intentional in the way that we support it as baby grows into a young toddler. Okay, there we go. So, some of the areas that you might see are an area for eating. So, you might have a low Montessori table and a chair when your baby starts solids, an area for a designated area for sleep, an area for movement. So, having a soft space where if you have a non mobile baby where they can practice moving on the floor, a self care area for diaper changing and eventually getting involved in their self care things in an area for work where they might play with their toys and stuff. So, having designated areas for all of these things is something that I find really aligns with where our babies and young toddlers are at in their development because they find trust and security in the consistency and expectations that we offer them. And so when you have a consistent space for eating or for sleep or for movement, for play, if they know where to find their toys, if they know where they get their diaper change, there's a safety in that. And then also, as they start to move, there's a level of involvement that can occur too, right? Because you can include them. I remember when I was in the classroom setting and I would let them know that lunch was ready. I had crawling babies that would come over to, I had a community table and they would crawl over to the community table and pull up to stand and pull out their chair and sit down. They were so involved from such a young age because the environment was prepared and things are consistent and they felt safe in their routines and there was just this confidence and empowerment that exuded from that. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about laying foundations of independence and inclusion during wake windows. This point is one that I highly suggest doing as often as possible with your young babies. And we're going to talk about why in just a second. So, the Montessori principle that aligns with this idea is fostering independence. And there's a lot of misconceptions around this idea that float around on social media and stuff like that. But Montessori fostering independence is absolutely not pushing baby to be independent from us during a dependent stage. Our babies and our young toddlers, they are fully and beautifully dependent. But this, what we're going to be talking about, it requires consistent and conscious connection that can enhance opportunities for things like healthy attachment. And you'll see why in just a second. So it is all about involving your baby in just about everything as developmentally appropriate and driven by them. So what does this look like? What does this look like with our newborns, our crawling, sitting, slithering, crawling, cruising babies, and our walking babies? So with our newborns, it might just look like laying foundations of respect. So saying, "Oh, I'm going to pick up your body now," versus just lugging them around, or talking about what's happening around their, in their world as they're getting dressed and such like that, including them in the processes. And then when they consciously start to reach, or when they're sitting and start to grab, or when they're a sitting, so they're crawling, cruising baby, and say, for example, you're all done with their solid meal, for example. If you have two rags, so one that you have to wipe them up, and then maybe one that you give them to practice wiping the table or something like that. So just slowing down and including them in the process. And as you can imagine, this presents a lot of opportunities for connection, for language, for sensory. So these are just really wonderful moments of opportunity. And then as they start to walk and become young walking toddlers, they have two free hands at that point, and so they can be involved in so much more. Dr. Montessori did describe the walking child as a young toddler. And so at that point, there's practical life, there's cooking, there's cleaning, there's all the really fun things that you do every day and that you will notice your child will then also want to do. And you can start including them as developmentally appropriate and as they can. Evidence supports that babies who are included in daily routines and given opportunities to explore their independence tend to develop stronger problem solving and a greater sense of self efficacy, which correlates with success in school and social relationships later on. And there's actually more and more research that comes out about children who are given tasks in the home and how that can correlate later on to them being able to meet their goals and problem solve and stuff like that. Something that we maybe used to think as, even I know that there's a cultural piece too to doing for your babies. I know in my culture, doing for your baby is it's a way that you show love. But if we can also just know that including them and offering them these opportunities is also wonderful for their development, then there's so much love in that too. I also want to note for movement, because I know often in infancy we see that marketed often are lot of playpens or things where you might contain baby. Movement is so important because it allows the child to use their inner drive to freely explore and really honor their inner little scientist and build their brain in the most optimal way. And mind you, I know that safety is number one. So you want to make sure your environment is safe to allow movement, but allowing movement and combining that with the things like the inclusion and the prepared environment and preparing yourself, and all of these things will work together to really support your baby. And movement is just so essential for their early learning experience. However, you can, just let them move as much as possible. So I want to note that in Montessori, like we started with, we treat our babies like capable members of their communities from the start, and we involve them as appropriate. And that is what's going to lead to an empowering start to life that optimizes your baby's development every step of the way. So I wanted to end things off by sharing this quote, which is: "The greatness of the human personality begins at the hour of birth." That is one of my favorite quotes, also because it's only recently that we started to recognize the potentiality in our babies and young toddlers. Dr. Montessori saw this, of course, but it was a common thought to get through infancy and young toddlerhood and wait until they could actually learn. But what we know now is that they are learning at the most rapid rate in these earliest years. And Again, it might seem daunting, but just know that having these tools in your pocket and just doing your very best is going to be the best for your baby. You're the perfect parent for your baby. So that is about it. That's what I have for you. So let me stop.
You. Welcome back.
Hello.
Perfect. So there is a first question from Christine. How do you include a toddler 1.5 years in cooking safely? This is the time I struggle the most. We are also in a small kitchen with not much space.
So I feel this very strongly because I also had my son, and my husband and I were in a small apartment with my son. And depending on your setup, if you have a low table, you can include them in that way in the Montessori table. Or if you have a toddler tower, bringing them up to counter height can be helpful. There are child safe tools. I would use cooking tools. Like there's a wooden knife that, at that age, they can cut, for example, banana or fruits, softer things. You can also cut them yourself and have them transfer into bowls. So you just want to observe to see where your child is at in their fine motor, but in mixing too. These are all kind of different things that ways that you can include them. Yeah.
Perfect. Can these strategies also support our baby in developing a sleeping routine?
Yes. So sleep is unique to each child and family, but having their wake windows filled with all of these experiences is going to really enhance their sleep, right? Because it's going to be, frankly, they're going to be tired because they're building their brain. And then the routines that you set up within their sleep can also have some of these principles. So, for example, inclusion in within their routine before sleep, the language, the reading. I know a common pre-sleep routine is going together to their sleep space, reading, singing a song, and then drifting off to sleep. So, a lot of the principles that we spoke about can be implemented within the sleep space. I also want to note too, one of the common Montessori points for infants in sleep is the Montessori floor bed. And that is something that you can start at any time. I personally went from bassinet to floor bed. I made sure my son's whole environment was very safe. The floor bed was very low and had a padded area around it. And I felt very confident in it too, because I had a lot of experience in the classroom setting too with babies on floor beds. But it is just so wonderful the way that they can have that extra level of inclusion from the start. And yeah, so I highly recommend for those who are interested in it.
Perfect. Another question. How can one implement some of the strategies for awake time with multiples, like twins, for instance?
So preparing your environment. So the bigger areas when you have multiple kids, so for example, your area for movement, your toy area, say you have a Montessori shelf or just a space where they have all of those things can be shared spaces. The part where you might have to get a little bit creative or add more will be, for example, if you have toddler towers, or you might want to get multiple chairs for a low table, stuff like that. And then it's just going to be about working with the two together. You'll probably want to familiarize yourself with the redirection strategies and working with siblings in the home together. But it can be a very beautiful thing. One of my clients had twins in the home, and it was just about observing the uniqueness of each child, offering materials and experiences like that, having together moments too. Like I encouraged the mama to have a daily circle time together and stuff like that. So it ends up being a really beautiful thing. You just have to flow and observe, let the observations guide, and it'll be beautiful.
Mika is writing a question also about twins. I'm currently working with 2-year-old twins for the first time. I see that they like to do everything together, but I also see that is slowing down one of them in learning, and the other one is not taking much initiative. How can I get them to work independently?
That's super hard because I guess I would encourage you to use observation. Spend time observing each individual child to see what they are driven to and offer those types of things within the environment. And you might notice more isolated um, moments of concentration and work periods. It is very common, for young toddlers to group, especially if they're twins. Um, but I would say that just using observation to drive what you offer each child and just honing in on the uniqueness of each child and offering that in this space is gonna be helpful.
How do you interact with a baby without interrupting their concentration?
In moments of concentration, you will know where like, when they're concentrating. If they're observing something, if they're working with a material, if they're building blocks, if they're observing something, you will see that they're concentrated. But when their concentration moment breaks, which their moments of concentration in infancy and toddlerhood aren't hours long, it's very small, it's seconds to minutes, depending on the child. And so when their concentration breaks, then you can offer the moment of inclusion to then transition into whatever you need to transition. Usually, a concentration break will look like not looking at it anymore, starting to throw it around, stuff like that. And then you can also, at the end of that, if your child is mobile, even before that, you can model it, but showing them how to put a material back can be a part of a way that you present a Montessori toy, but also sets them up for early cleaning too.
Let me read another one from Annette. How often should I rotate the toys for a 6-month-old? It feels like he gets bored of his toys very quickly.
Probably hear me talk about observation a lot, but you really just want to see one, what toys and materials they are interested in, and which ones that they seem to not at all be interested in. You can rotate those ones out and offer them at a later time. But then also, sometimes there are points where infants and toddlers are driven to their bigger environment, for example, movement. There are times where you might see, I know with my son, there were periods where for a week and a half, 2 weeks, he was not interested at all in materials, and it's because he was so driven to move. And so I would just use observation to see if maybe that's also the reason, because sometimes they're working on a skill. Say, for example, you have a 6-month-old who's practicing their sitting, and that's something that they're very interested in. And there might be sensory, experiences that go along with that. Say you have a basket of balls that you can offer them, stuff like that. But if they're driven to movement, I would just honor that. Just use observation and flow together.
From Catherine in the Zoom chat, how do you recommend introducing new gross motor activities without interrupting their favorite fine motor activities?
It can just depend. So if we're talking about an older child, so like a young toddler, for example, you can have a more structured periods. So you can have even a small working cycle for young toddlers. It won't be the 3-hour work cycle that you see in the primary space, but you can transition from a work cycle into a movement moment together, maybe music and movement where you're jumping and twisting and skipping or stuff like that, or even doing yoga together is really lovely. That's something that I like to do with my son. So, yeah, you can have structured periods where you're going from one thing to the other. I also did that with my small babies in the classroom. You can also see too, because young kids, when they are done working on their materials, it will be very obvious because, like I said, they'll start to wander or they'll misuse the materials or stuff like that. And it's just letting us know, the behavior is letting us know that they're done with it. So you can then just segue into what you want to introduce.
From Sophia, what can I do during the window when awake window when baby just wants to be held the whole time?
So every baby has their own temperament, right? So some babies definitely want to be on and with mama a lot more than others. I would just honor that, but then also if you're hoping for more movement and floor time, if you can have purposeful moments where you're there with them, so laying next to them on the floor, maybe even still like rubbing their back or holding their hand, just being together in those moments, I think are going to be really helpful in them getting comfortable. Because like I said, some babies you can just lay down and they're like roll onto their tummy and slithering over to their shelf, and others take a little bit more time to transition to that. Yeah, I would just do it with them if they need that and support them in that way.
Thank you. Should routines be the same every day to establish a pattern from just
Routines and the consistency of them are very helpful because, like we spoke about in the presentation, our babies find safety and security in the consistency and expectation. Of course, there are going to be times where we're out or things aren't able to be as, I guess, rigid as in the home space, but just honoring them as much as possible, I think will help babies feel safe and secure. And also, our babies are in a sensitive period for order. And some babies have a stronger sense of order than others. And that also aligns with their temperament. So you'll notice that, kind of like we just mentioned with temperament, some babies are totally fine if you just, I guess, breeze through a routine, and others really need you to stick to it. And so I encourage you to just use observation and your mama intuition to guide that.
thank you. Another one I have here is how can we prepare our first child for their new sibling? From Tina.
Oh, including them in a lot of the prep, I think is gonna be really helpful, right? Because in Montessori, we want our babies and toddlers to be empowered members of their home communities. So including them in the home prep for their new sibling. And then when baby is there, so you can do things like read books, sing songs. There's a lot of different tools out there for the arrival of a sibling. And then when baby is there, one tip that I really loved that I learned a while back is to treat baby and toddler with the same type of language. For example, when your baby gets there, when toddler needs something and baby is okay, letting them know, okay, I'm gonna help your brother or sister now, and helping the toddler in the same way as you would obviously tell the toddler, oh, I'm feeding your brother or sister right now. I'll help you in a second. So just keeping it consistent in that way, I think can create a connection piece from the start.
In the Zoom chat, in my community, I see that many babies, toddlers, and little kids can only eat with a screen in front of them, in which I'm so against it. Now, sometimes my co-caregivers doing that to my 16-month-old when he seems just cannot sit still for a meal, like most of the time. Could you give me some advice on this? I think this is not good for his concentration and also indirectly leading him to not have a good relationship with food. Thanks.
This is a really interesting topic. The world of food is its own world. And you're so right that at the beginning, they are developing their relationship to food. Things definitely need, I encourage consistency because your babies and your toddlers and young children will have a lot less confusion within the environment if all of the caregivers are on the same page. So I would start there and talk with your fellow caregiver about not wanting to offer screens during meals. There might be a transition out of that, but I wanna note that one, for 16 months, oftentimes, like we spoke about, sometimes kids are very driven to move, and it might be just a period where they're super gross motor driven, but our babies and toddlers will eat when they're hungry, so just use observation in that way. And then also in respect to their relationship with food, one of the tips that I really loved, something that I would do in the classroom, because I would receive babies and toddlers who were, for example, distracted to eat, screens to eat, stuff like that. What I would do is give them their food, and I would have my own food, and I would just model eating, and then wait for them to even touch their food. If they even touch it, that's a win. If they touch it and bring it to their mouth, but then they're like, no, that's another win, because they're little by little understanding that's what we're doing in this moment. And then again, being on the same page with your fellow caregiver and just being very consistent with it, you'll see a world of difference after some time.
Thank you. From Drake in the Zoom chat, how do you help your baby with change? Just moved from UK to Canada, and it's a big change in routine, family around, car seat struggles, etc.
Totally. Our babies will definitely show us when they're in a transition, as I'm sure you've experienced, offering a lot of different TLC, but also keeping your own energy light and regulated. And then when you are talking with your baby, sharing in the joys that are around, keeping their routines as much as possible, their own home routines as much as possible consistent. It's a huge change to do that big of a move, but Yeah, I would say those things, just honing in on your own prepared adultness in that sense, and then honoring their routines that they're familiar with. Their transitions can take anywhere from a few weeks to even up to a couple months, depending on the temperament of the child. But you got this. It'll be okay.
Sophie, should you always try and entertain your child and encourage them to interact with their toys? Or is it better to leave them to play on their own for period? My daughter is 11 months.
In between. So I would say that in the I don't necessarily like to view it as entertaining. I like to view it more so as modeling, interacting in the sense of maybe showing them how to use the toys in their space. But when you notice that they're concentrated, even taking a small step back and letting them be, you'll probably notice when you're not there too that these moments will elongate. Also, because sometimes too, they'll consistently look to us for it can also be hard as a parent to not, go, "Yay!" or jump in when they do something or they build something or so even taking a step back might be helpful for you too, just because those can break the moments of concentration, and what we want is to keep enhancing those moments of concentration, but I always scream "DA" inside anyway. Inside.
Okay, and I think this will be a last question. Any tips to help a young toddler with a tough experience at the doctor's office? I want to help her process her fear so the next appointment is easier. It's from Catherine.
Oh, hi, Catherine. So I would suggest probably getting a few tools like books, stuff like that. There's toddler doctor anatomy puzzles, stuff like that. I would just expose them more so to the doctor world. I my son's actually in a similar place right now where he's saying, "Oh, I don't want to go to the doctor." But we're just focusing on reading a couple books about that. And then again, also in your own self, I know it can be hard to stay regulated ourselves because we're anticipating our babies being upset. But as much as possible, just letting them know and being confident in this is what you want for your child. This is a decision you're making for your child that is going to be really helpful in their process. Yeah, and then just talking them through it, maybe labeling the emotion and then helping them through to the other side with your own regulation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. First of all, again, thank you for being here.
Me. It was really
And yeah. And there were two or three questions about the recordings, just for everyone to have information clear. We are doing these live talks as part of our Childhood Potential Club. You can attend live for free. Everyone can attend live for free. We are also doing like a first 20-25 minutes for free that we are sharing on YouTube, and we are also sharing this part on the registration page where everyone registered before. And then we have the rest, the whole recording available in the Childhood Potential Club. And you can try that with a trial for $7, like a time limited trial, so you can see what is there. We have almost 200 videos in the library. We have personal coaching. We have peer mentoring. So there are more things that you can enjoy except the live talks that we do once or twice per month. So that's just to answer the question. And Bianca, I wanted to ask you, is there something that you would like to invite the people who are here to? For example, one of your courses or your podcast, or where they can find you and how you can be there for them more.
Yes. I host the Montessori Babies podcast, which you can find anywhere. But if you are looking for a detailed experience that has quite literally everything that you need to support your baby's development from 0 to 2, I teach the Montessori Babies course. We are a lovely international community of new, mostly Montessori mamas who are supporting our baby's development through Montessori. And you get direct support from me as well within that. I also have a webinar on how to foster independence that's broken down by newborn baby, sitting, slithering, crawling, cruising, and walking babies. That is a free webinar that I also highly suggest checking out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much for
Bianca, again for being here. Thanks everyone for being here, for asking so many wonderful questions, for sending so wonderful comments. Thanks to everyone. And again, big thank you to Bianca.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.
Perfect. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.